Okay, well, good morning. It's good to see you all. Thank you. It's such an honor and delight to be able to host this event. I'm Greg Johnson, director of the Walter H. Capps Center for the Study of Ethics, Religion, and Public Life here at UCSB. Today is going to be a great day. I'll have a chance to address you at greater length later, so I'll keep it short now. It's such an honor to be able to kick off the day's events and to welcome to this stage my friend and colleague, Kathleen Moore, who's the Associate Dean of Humanities and Fine Arts here at UCSB, and also Professor of Religious Studies, and a colleague I've learned so much from about law, religion, and also about collegial citizenship. So thank you, Kathy, for doing this for us. Welcome, Kathy Moore.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you. I'm very excited and honored to be part of this conversation this morning and kick off the day's events. And as Professor Johnson mentioned, I'm Kathleen Moore, Associate Dean of Humanities and Fine Arts, and I am in the Religious Studies Department. Unfortunately, I was never able to meet Walter Capps, but as Greg said yesterday and many of the participants attested to, Walter Capps left a gigantic and indelible footprint in our field. So it's wonderful to be here to commemorate the course that Walter Capps taught in this very auditorium, where so many events take place. But this is one that is historic. I've heard many stories about Walter Capps' gifted teaching, and I can tell you that I think no one has addressed our students, asked our students to think deeply about the challenges that are facing our country, and no one has prepared them better to reckon with these issues than Walter Capps did. So I'm very happy that you've decided to join us this morning for Remembering the Vietnam War class. This is a panel on Walter Capps' famous course on the Vietnam War and its impacts, featuring former instructors and guest speakers for the course. My role today is, and I'm honored to introduce a good colleague and friend who is going to be the first speaker in the panel and moderate the panel, and this is Richard Hecht, who is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Religious Studies at UCSB, where he joined the faculty in the 1970s and taught until his retirement 2 years ago. Richard is here with us virtually and not able to join us in flesh. I believe Richard's in Europe somewhere. He will let us know. But Richard served until very recently as the director of the UCSB Taubman Endowed Symposia. And his interests are diverse and multidisciplinary in the deep contextualization of religion and the intersection of religion, politics, and culture. After Walter Capps ran for Congress in 1994, Hecht taught the Vietnam War course until it ended in 2018, and I can think of no one better to do that. As chair of the Department of Religious Studies from 1995 to 1999, when Clark Roof assumed that position, Professor Hecht was involved with the planning of the Walter H. Capps Center, as we heard from EVC David Marshall yesterday. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn this over to my friend and colleague, Richard Hecht. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I hope people can hear me. It's a great honor to share the stage with Governor and Senator Bob Kerrey and also Shad Meshad, who both were instrumental in the first decade of this extraordinary class. What I'd like to do now, very, very briefly, is have our colleagues in the back put up a small or a short slide series that I'd like to share with you that will give you an idea of some of the characters I'll be speaking about later. Could I have the slide show at the present time? So it's wonderful that we can have this event. I'm sure Greg and the others calculated this perfectly, that we could have this discussion on Veterans Day to mark it. So can I have the first slide? So this is a photograph that I'm sending really to several of my colleagues who I think have spoken to you yesterday. And I say that I send you my regrets for not being able to be in Santa Barbara to greet you and say hello and remember the past with you. But we put together a conference to mark the 10th anniversary of Walter's death. And I took this photograph of the people who spoke at that conference. So I'd like to introduce them to you. You've met them, but they were a bit younger then. So way over on the left is Robert Orsi, who was one of the main speakers, Professor Orsi. And then we have Professor Tomoko Masuzawa and Professor Wendy Wright, and then next to her, David Chittister from South Africa, and then one of the great scholars in the study of religion who began his career at UCSB and became very, very friendly with the Capps family, Jonathan Z. Smith, who passed away on December 31st, 2017. And there, of course, is Congresswoman Lois Capps. And then next to her is Sarah McFarland Taylor. And then in the back, Ed Linenthal. And then finally, Roger Friedland. And then the first director of the Capps Center, our beloved Clark Roof. Next slide, please. So to mark the 25th anniversary of the class, many of the speakers who had come to the class, we decided that we would have an event where we'd take about 50 students or so to Washington, D.C. And Lois arranged for us to receive a congressional plaque. And here are all the people who have been instrumental in the class. And the slide is a little small for me to see, but I'll try to remember everyone. So way over on the left is Jim Nolan. Next to him is Mike Madrid. Then I believe Malcolm Hamilton. And next to Malcolm Hamilton is John Moore. And there is Congresswoman Lois Capps. And then next to her is Shad Meshad. Then Bill Mahidi, Reverend Bill Mahidi. And then Jack Wheeler. And then finally, Wilson Hubble. And then we met for this photograph and a bit of a ceremony at the tree that Congress planted in honor of Walter. It's now a much larger tree, but you can see it's something like a sapling. Next slide, please. Here is a typical adventure during February of Religious Studies 155, where we took a group of students to Washington, D.C. And we visited many places such as the Veterans Administration, the State Department. Of course, we visited the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the Smithsonian Museum, Arlington National Cemetery, etc. And here are many of the people with the students who participated in the class for several years. Now I'd like to end the slide presentation and talk to you about the class. Organizers of the conference asked me to give you a brief overview of the class, although I assume that some of you are very, very familiar and spent many days on Tuesday and Thursday in the months of January, February, and early March in the classroom, either here in Campbell Hall or in another auditorium. But what we'll do today is I'm going to speak very briefly, and then I'll introduce our distinguished guests, Governor and Senator Bob Kerrey, and then, of course, Shad Meshad. Each of them will speak for about 15 minutes. Then we'll have a bit of a discussion amongst ourselves, and then we'll, I hope, have enough time for one or two questions from the audience. I must tell you that in 1995, when Walter asked me to take the course from him, I was really intimidated. The course had already been the subject of two 60-minute segments. I found 7 articles on the class in national journals, and I was really intimidated. And I remember what Walter told me. He said, "There's nothing to worry about. The veterans will support you." And they did. And then Wilson Hubble, who worked with Walter, I believe, since 1979 in the class, will support you. And Wilson did. And Wilson and I taught the course together for the first decade after Walter's death. And we were joined by Jim Nolan, a Marine veteran who received 3 Purple Hearts. And the 3 of us offered the course as co-instructors every winter quarter until 2018. We agreed that we would continue to offer the course as long as all 3 of us were able to do it. When the cancer that Jim had contracted as a result of Agent Orange defoliant made it impossible for him to continue, the 3 of us made the decision to end the course together. The UCSB alumni magazine, Coastlines, featured the end of the course in 2018 in the spring issue of Coastlines. Now, among the many veterans who spoke in the course were veterans whose stories were so powerful that you could sit there in Campbell Hall as you are, and you could hear the breathing and even the heartbeat of students and others sitting around you. And literally, many men and women wept during the presentations. I remember Rose Sendecki, for example, a combat nurse who, when she came back to California after her service, was unable to use any of the techniques that she had saved lives with in emergency hospitals because she wasn't a doctor. I remember Tony Cordero, whose father was an Air Force major in navigator in a B-57 that was shot down over North Vietnam. He was the first soldier from Santa Barbara to be killed during the Vietnam War. And in 1989, Tony formed something called Sons and Daughters in Touch, which was an effort to bring together the children and grandchildren of Gold Star families. And Tony would come to the class and each year would tell us about the search for the remains of his father in North Vietnam. I remember Michael Moore, who was born and grew up in Santa Barbara, became a soldier in the Vietnam War, suffered extraordinary PTSD, who became a championship poker player. And I believe in 2013, he won the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas and made almost $500,000 as a poker player. He passed away shortly after becoming a very successful landscape painter influenced by the work of Georgia O'Keeffe in South Dakota. There are 2 individuals who need to be mentioned today with regard to the course: Eula Laux and Roger Himovitz. Eula Laux entered the graduate program in religious studies at the age of 69 and completed her PhD dissertation on the subject of the meaning of children in contemporary America with Walter and was a lifelong supporter of many of Walter's courses and his research. Roger Himovitz took the Vietnam course when he returned to the university and ultimately was one of the teaching assistants who worked with the undergraduate students who enrolled in the course. Likewise, Roger helped provide scholarships for students who wanted to go with us to Washington in the month of late February each year. Now, the class always ended with two special presentations, one by Dr. Sharon Rapp, who worked with the Veterans Administration as a therapist and had almost all of the veterans who spoke in a weekly group session. She told the students what we had actually experienced. We were part of the therapy of those veterans, all of whom suffered from relatively extreme cases of post-traumatic stress. The penultimate class was a meeting with Wilson Hubble, and I have to tell you about it. Wilson grew up in San Diego, was a long-distance bicyclist, and I mean a really long-distance bicyclist. He would bicycle across the United States several times. He bicycled around Mexico, in Europe, and one day he was reading one of his bicycle magazines. He saw an advertisement for Cycle Vietnam. It was a bicycle trip that would take him from Hanoi to Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City, 1,700 kilometers. And Wilson ultimately did it. And he would take the students along that 1,700 kilometer bike trip with the students. At one point, he found his way to one of the beaches near the base that he served in. And as he told the students, he was looking at the sand dunes and the water that he remembered. A young Vietnamese man came up to him wearing bathing trunks. And Wilson, who remembered a bit of his Vietnamese, said to him, "Toi mai, I'm an American. He pointed back to the area of Quy Nhon. I was in Army over there. I'm from California, Santa Barbara, California." The young Vietnamese man looked at him for a moment with a smirk and in perfect English said, "No shit, like I was so dumb. I'm Frank from Tustin." At one point, Wilson made it to the base where he had been stationed. And in that base, he confronted a Vietnamese soldier who had been in the Viet Cong when Wilson was in that base. And they became friends. And at the end, this Vietnamese soldier, an officer, gave Wilson a picture of himself in his North Vietnamese Army uniform, and he wrote on the back a well-known Vietnamese epigram used among friends. Quote, "The wind will erase the words on the tombstone, but friendship will never end." Wilson gave him a soldier patch from his battalion. The return to Vietnam, the chance meetings with a Vietnamese American in Vietnam, and his adversary 3 decades before changed the meaning of Vietnam for him. His last slide was a photo taken from his airplane as it left Vietnam, with the rice paddies shimmering in the reflected sunlight. And Wilson said, "Vietnam was no longer a war. Vietnam is a place." Now let me introduce to you our speakers. First of all, Bob Kerrey, who has decades of public service and healthcare experience serving vulnerable populations. He served as governor of Nebraska from 1983 to 1987, and as a United States Senator from Nebraska from 1989 to 2001. He is also a veteran of the Vietnam War, where he served as a U.S. Navy SEAL officer, and in 1970 was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. He served as president of the New School University from 2001 to 2010, and then Emeritus President of the New School University until 2013. During his presidency, the New School evolved into a major degree-granting urban university widely recognized for its emphasis on design in a social context. Kerrey is credited with doubling the size of the full-time faculty and securing the new school's future by raising more than $110 million to advance the key academic and administrative objectives. Throughout his career, he has demonstrated a commitment to support other veterans and their access to health care. He was also a co-instructor with Walter in the early decade of the class. Please welcome Senator and Governor Bob Kerrey.
That's a really good question. I have a choice to make? Wow, a choice. I think I'll sit. It's nice having the Wizard of Oz behind me. First of all, I came here because of the CAPS, Lois and Laura, and I've gotten, fortunately, very close to the CAPS family, and it was, and still is, it's great to both be with you and tell you stories and have you tell me stories and so forth. So I think Walter would not object. Is it too informal to put my arm over this chair? If it is, you're out of luck, because I don't think he'd be offended by it, but you know, he's not here to be mad at me. In fact, I don't think he ever got mad at me for anything. So I am, I believe, accurately described as a plankton. And if you don't know plankton, maybe there's more plankton on Earth than any other species out there. But plankton is defined by its motility. That's how you tell a plankton. Plankton cannot move on their own. They just go with the wind. They blow with the ocean currents. That's how they move about. And that pretty much describes me. So everything on the list of things that I've done, I knew almost nothing about when I started, including co-teaching a class with Walter. It was a difficult choice for me. I was 43 years old. I just stepped down as governor. And Walter gave me an opportunity. It could be framed this way. I could either stay in Omaha, Nebraska for January, February, and March, or I could come out to Santa Barbara for January, February, and March. And the last month, I was only here a quarter, and the senior Democratic senator in Nebraska died in office. One of the great things I ever heard anybody say about a recently deceased person was a very good friend of his. He called me and said, Ed's died. And I was the first one to come upon his body. And you know, Bob, he never looked better. So anyway, so I'm relatively confident that I would not have run for governor, run for senator, were it not for Walter in this class. But the person who followed me as governor is a Republican, and she appointed, obviously, a Republican to be her successor. And, you know, at the funeral, they were urging me to run, and they were I ran in spite of the fact that I watched them in the back room arguing about who's going to get Ed Zirinsky's office, who's going to get his committees. It was a really unpleasant scene, and I would not have run for Senate. And I did it for 2 terms. Walter was really a fun person to talk to because there was almost nothing he couldn't talk about. And he didn't feel like it was inappropriate to bounce around from topic to topic, which is, as I self-described myself, that's who I am. And as I was trying to think, well, what am I going to say to all of you other than congratulations to the young people who showed up on Saturday morning. I genuinely do congratulate you. I doubt I would have done the same as you when I was your age. I just mentioned 3 books that are, for me at least, relevant to this conversation. The first is Jane Hamilton's book, The Second Law of Thermodynamics. Second is Charles Baxter's book, Relative Stranger. And the last is Foreseeable Future by Reynolds Price. In the first, what Hamilton asserts is that everything changes depending on where you stand and where you are. It does. The world looks different to me today than it did in 1987. It looks different than it did yesterday. So not only should you not be appalled by that, it should be a source of not necessarily inspiration, but a source of discovery, which on my mind is perhaps the most important things that human beings can do. Last night at dinner, there was a young woman there who actually took Walter's class later on in her life, but she's, I think, I was about to say how old I think she is, which is, I guess, not something that I should do. So she worked on Walter's campaign, raising money, his second campaign, I believe. And so when I asked her her story, she came to the United States from Vietnam when she was 2 years old in 1975. I said, how about your parents? My mom came with me. My dad was a South Vietnamese pilot, and he was held prisoner by the North Vietnamese for 15 more years before he was allowed to come to the United States, probably only allowed because the Soviet Union collapsed the year that he was allowed to come to the United States and join his family. Now, I'm willing to assert that if I had been a friend of her father's doing the same thing in the 1970s as he was doing, I might have a much different view of the Vietnam War than based upon my limited experience. It's just true. Among the things I wish Walter was allowed to hear about is when we normalized relations with Vietnam in 1995. It was a big moment for me because we had worked to get the roadmap written with former President Bush, Herbert Walker Bush. That involved, the POW MIA issue. We had to resolve that. We had to get a peace agreement with Cambodia. We didn't have diplomatic relations with Vietnam, so we couldn't negotiate directly with us. It was complicated, confusing. Bush wrote the roadmap. Then he loses. And he lost to a guy who famously did not go to Vietnam. And Bill Clinton bravely, is my voice starting to get quieter and quieter as I move this microphone away? So Bill Clinton signed the normalization legislation in 1995. We sent a former POW, Pete Peterson, back there as our first ambassador. Unbeknownst to the president, I basically stole $150 million that was supposed to go from Vietnam to the United States and ended up going to create a college in Ho Chi Minh City, Fulbright University, Vietnam. And we've graduated over 1,000 graduate students. We started an undergraduate program a couple of years ago. The current head of the Communist Party's son goes to that school. And when I asked him, because when he was born, he said he was born in 61, 61, meaning, I said, were you in Hanoi for the Christmas bombing of 1972? Oh, yes. He said, I snuck out. It was very exciting. I saw B-52s being shot down. And he tells this story as if he was talking about going to a movie the previous day. We killed 1,700 people on the Christmas bombing as an effort by Richard Nixon, who just won a landslide re-election, to try to get the North Vietnamese to come back to the negotiating table, which they did, and they actually ended up getting more than they would have had it not been for the Christmas bombing. Anyway, you can get wrapped up in the horror of that, the terror of that, the hypocrisy of that, the ugliness of that, or you can lash up with the chairman of the Communist Party in Vietnam and help him try to build his country, which is the choice that I make. So Reynolds Price wrote his book, The Foreseeable Future. Anyway, Jane Hamilton's book is quite good about the theory. It's a little obscene, so I won't go into it. But Reynolds had a star-shaped carcinoma on his spine, and he had to have it cut out. And I don't know if they do that today, but they did it. And they said, there's a possibility that you're going to you're going to be paralyzed when this is over. And he wasn't, so he's very happy. Walking to class at Duke one day, he said, it's like a light switch went on and my legs gave out. So he's paralyzed. So he writes this book called The Foreseeable Future about a guy who comes back from the Second World War, had been on D-Day, and he tells his wife, the man who went to the Second World War is dead. Well, you're standing right in front. No, the man who went there died in France. Well, that set her off a little bit, but he brings himself back to life. He ends up getting a job as a property and casualty adjuster, the guy that goes out to an accident and says, oh yeah, we owe you $5,000 or whatever. So he went to disasters, places where people had suffered a terrible loss. And he calculated, his job was to calculate how much do we owe you for this loss. That's what he did. And the story goes on for a week. It's a relatively short story. It goes on, and when he's done with that week, at each one of these stops, there's been something added back. So when he arrives back home after that week, after having experienced all these losses, he was alive again. He was no longer dead. And the last one, I don't need to go into detail because I have a feeling, but even without looking at my watch, I may have gone a little over my time. The other one's called Relative Stranger, and it's Charles Baxter. And what I like about Charles Baxter's idea is don't walk away from the stranger. Because you're much more apt to learn something from the stranger, because obviously you didn't know anything about him or her in the first place. All you've got is people that you know. You only know them. Why waste your time on Shad? Why do I wander around in the audience to get to know somebody? But all three of these, to my mind, in some way unite the whole idea of trying to understand Vietnam. Vietnam is different. This is the 11th of November, obviously. And the 11th of November 1918, the powers that be decided. I mean, it's a horror to think about, 4 or 5 old white men sitting around saying, well, when do we want to end it? How about the 11th of November? How about 11 o'clock in the morning on the 11th of November? So you guys can keep shooting up until then. You can keep killing up until then, and afterwards it's over. And I just try to imagine what it must have been like to come back after that horror and try to adjust, try to understand what it's all about. And all the opportunities that we've missed over the course of our nation's short, happy life, maybe at the end of the First World War, we missed many that had a huge impact, including Ho Chi Minh was there trying to get recognized, including the Arabs trying to get recognized. Neither of those happened because we didn't see what good could come out of it if we did. All this is to say, for my money, if I get trapped in feeling sorry for myself because something terrible happened to me, or somebody said something terrible to me, or some other experience, all hope is lost. I cannot survive cynicism. I live on skepticism. But cynicism, to me, I don't want to touch it. And cynicism is what happens oftentimes to old people. And if you haven't recognized this, I am old. I said earlier that when I'm trying to impress upon my children how old I am, I simply say, you young people get ready for this. I was born before Google. That's who I am. All right, so the worst thing I can do is to become cynical. And it's a short voyage from skeptic to a cynic. Skeptic says, prove the facts. The cynic says, I don't believe human beings are capable of doing good. And it becomes, in the mouth of an old person, it becomes a virus that is intentionally delivered to infect young people. So beware the old cynic. That's my advice to those of you 5 rows back. So, okay, I'm done. Shad, you ready?
Am I ready? First of all, it's very different sitting on this stage. I stood for almost 20 straight years with Walter doing the class or whatever, but this is sacred ground. I think of all the vets and people, from Russian soldiers to Vietnamese children and the thousands of kids. I think the big moment was at Walter's funeral, and certain of us were allowed in the mission church, but outside there were like 4,000 students that had went through the class. And when I heard them yelling my name, I had to run out and embrace as many as I could, because that's what it was about. I think we're supposed to start with the slide. I'm supposed to ask the Avery to kick off the Is it good? Okay. I don't think there's any sound.
And strong, but I'm excited. I'm excited because really the person who introduced me to the Vietnam War topic in a way that became accessible for this campus is our guest today. And he has spoken to this class over the years more frequently than anybody else. He was the first vet to speak to the class when the class was organized back in 1979. We figured coming in here this morning that when he and I were up here doing this, some of you were probably about 5 or 6 or 7 years old. So we've been at this for some time. His name is Shad Meshad. Shad Meshad. You spell the last name M-E-S-H-A-D, and you spell the first name S-H-A-D. You leave off the M-E first time through. It's Shad Meshad. Shad and I was responsible for organizing a conference on the Vietnam War that was supposed to be about a 4-day kind of thing that Mrs. Eula Laux, who I think is watching this today or tonight, sort of sponsored. And because we didn't, we had experts who could talk to us about military policy and the philosophy of the United States in getting involved in Vietnam, but we had no Vietnam vets. Shad was the first Vietnam vet that I met in a way that was a significant encounter for me. And when I met Shad, I learned that there's an awful lot more to the Vietnam War than can be written down in the history books. There's a lot more to the Vietnam War that can be put down in the manuals about military strategy. Indeed, when I say indeed because I learned how to talk that way too, but it's just enough to say in fact, I think. I got my perspective on the Vietnam War by listening carefully to what Shad Meshad was talking about, and by observing closely and carefully what his life became about after he came back from the Vietnam War. Now, Wilson Hubble up here has heard me say this before, but I have referred to Shad as Mr. Vietnam, and by that I mean that he's been involved in all of it. He is the co-founder, along with Bill Mahidi, of the Veterans Outreach Program. And the Veterans Outreach Program is the predecessor institution to the vet centers around the country. The vet centers happened because Shad went before the Congressional Committee way back in, I don't know, 1978 or 79, and convinced Congress that the vet center program ought to be funded. It was Shad who did the talking then. It was also Bill who did the writing of that proposal, but they worked on that together. When it came time for there to be a national salute to the Vietnam veterans, there again Shad was in, not just in the middle of it, but the leader of it, one of the leaders of it. He was there in Washington when the memorial was dedicated in 1982. He has probably met and counseled more Vietnam vets than any other human being, and he's a Vietnam vet himself, having served 12 years in Vietnam as a psychology officer. And his life since he went to Vietnam has been Vietnam. He is currently the executive director of the Vietnam Veterans Aid Foundation in Los Angeles, after having served as the West Coast, I'm getting some of this language not quite right, but the director of the Veterans Outreach Program. On the first trip that Vietnam veterans made to the Soviet Union to meet with vets from the Afghan War, of course there was Shad leading that delegation. When the New York Times article, the first article that came out about that, was published, it was about Shad and the encounters that he had had with Soviet vets. When the vets came to this country, the vets from the Soviet Union, to meet up with American vets in this land, again it was Shad who organized that, who met those people. And he continues to do it, to this day. There would not be a class of this kind of dimensions or with this perspective at UCSB had it not been for Shad Meshad. Well, I said I was not going to take time from his presentation to make a long introduction, but I'm deliberately cutting this short because one of the keys to my success is to try to see the world through the eyes of Shad Meshad. I'm very pleased today to present him as the co-founder of this class. Please welcome Shad Meshad.
Thanks for having me here today. 12 years have gone.
Enough of Shad Meshad, but never enough of Walter. I've always said I'm the most blessed person I've ever met in my life. I really am. And one of the big blessings is for so many people in this room is Walter Capps. I always considered him not just a unique comedian, but a magician. And it continues way past his physical presence here. It just echoes through everybody and still to me. That moment on Montecito Mountain in this mansion with a colleague, Fred Downs. We were the two Vietnam vets who were to tell these internationally known political scientists that had written about our war. And Walter was smart enough to say, well, maybe we should bring somebody there that was in the war. And Fred suffered quite a bit like Senator Bob here. They lost body parts. I mean, my soul, I used to say I got lost, but it got dark. But we were there after listening to these six professors from all over the world talk about our war. Walter knew just the timing. When they finished, they took a break and brought his own, and Fred looks at me and says, you want to go first? And I go, no, Fred, you go first. I told this last night. He had this chrome arm and shoulder. He had his shoulder blown off in Vietnam. He's an author, too, The Killing Zone. I hadn't written my book yet, but he cocked his arm on this beautiful Camp David-type pool table with all the speakers, with all these people in front of us, and drilled it into that table. And the first thing I thought is, we have to pay for this? He just drilled it. You could see the imprint. And he started. And then I went on. And that's when really the very explosion in Walter's mind, this is somehow going to be taught. And then from then on, I spent every month at Walter's home. I watched his kids grow up. I slept in the oldest's bed. And we started talking, and I started introducing him to some of my colleagues that were actually on the streets. My nickname was the Madman. I was very angry for a good reason about how we were treated, those coming back. I've always said we fought the war in Vietnam and we fought the war coming home. I don't think anybody has done that, to my knowledge. Maybe Bob knows because he's well read. But I was just a street guy, but I listened every day up until 77 to the voices of those I was working with to bring home in Los Angeles, which had a population of 335,000 Vietnam-era veterans in one city, actually the county. And I listened to their stories from Watts, South Central, East LA, Venice Beach, the canyons. We did a piece on 60 Minutes with these Marines that had dug up into the mountains to hide out from society. And those stories need to be told. What Walter did, however this happened, whether it was me, Fred, or who knows, brought the stories to the world via this university by starting this class. The first class we did in 79, there were 50. 3 Vietnam vets in that class. We didn't know. We just did this thing. It was really for non-veterans, we thought, to tell our story. And then the next year, 500. And the rest of the time, it was Campbell Hall. It was packed. There were people outside standing. This class got so popular, as Dr. Hecht said, 2 times on 60 Minutes. It just evolved. It was a force. It was the class in America every year. and almost 1,000 students or whatever. It really enhanced my work knowing that I didn't have to stay in the bowels of LA just working, trying to bring broken soldiers back. But there was a voice now, and it came through Walter and the class. And then I got attention, and I went to Washington, and I had to battle Republicans that were World War II vets that called us crybabies, and that was the big fight. And I enjoyed my anger and trying to tell them it's not about quantity of time, it's about quality. And yeah, we served a year, and I remember Tiger Teague. He was this big congressman, and he was the head of the Veterans Affairs, and I used to go at him head on from 77, 78 until Public Law 96-22 got pulled through after he retired. Carter and whatever got the vote, but and it was interesting. I was nominated for the Olin Teague Award as a finalist 2 years later, and his wife came up to me and said, he really liked you. He loved jawing with you or whatever. But, you know, it was always a battle for us. It was always a battle to say, hey, either we were this or we were that, or the war was unpopular, you know. People would say, you lost the war. We never lost a battle. Go figure. I mean, I'm not a politician. I'm sure Bob agrees. People did not want to address the fact that this war was a scar on our history, and the scars remain even today with our new wars. And the family, I mean, to be welcomed into his family, I mean, to be in Lois and Walter's home and be a part of the home and developing, it was just a synergy that came. And it's just been a miracle. Like I said, when I really hit me was at his funeral, at the mission, and roped off were all these students, and they're yelling, and I felt, in a way, I came home because how much the class had meant to them. That was the important thing. I knew what the war was about. I knew I'm dealing with it today with the National Veterans Foundation. My book, I'm author on my year in Vietnam. I was a mental health officer. I was flying into combat zones. I had no authority, but I was supposed to counsel troops in a traumatic situation. And it was like, it took me 10 years to say, okay, well, you know, it's not all about the combat and all the special effects we see today in war. It's really what's going on in the heart and souls of people in the stand-down areas, in the hospitals, the pilots, the boaters. It was just a summation, and you know, I tried to tell that side of the story. It's finally, after 40-something years, it's on Amazon, but it's not a combat story, it's a soul story. It's about the dark, it's Mahidi, my colleague and dear friend of Walter, the dark side of our spirituality. You know, I kept saying we lost our souls. It was dark, and Walter played a big role in bringing light to us and to the world, starting with the students and with all the publications, the books that he put out, at least 2 books about this journey. And we're still going on it today. And I'm blessed, given that I'm going to be 80 next year, that I've been able to continue to do the work. And it really, what drives me are the young OEF, OIF vets that are on my team. They're all disabled. They've all been rated with post-traumatic stress. And you couldn't buy those individuals. I mean, I've just been blessed, but it starts here. This university, I think, really, in my opinion, opened the world up to really the totality of the experience, whether it's from the top, from a Medal of Honor winner, a senator, a governor. We had a voice, and I think Walter, I'm prejudiced, I think Walter gave us that voice. And the Caps gave me a family here on the West Coast that I didn't have. And Walter was listening and said, we need to get this out. And I'm looking, yesterday I met some of the class members, and in the mid-'80 classes that we did, and it just melted me. They're here today, and that's really what this was all about. And they're here because something happened in that class, in that course. And I'll be walking through airports. I've been all over the world. I'm obviously a pioneer in post-traumatic stress. So I'd lecture and teach and things like that. It's a different thing. I used to tell people the only good thing that came out of Vietnam was me alive and the definition of PTSD. That was about it. Probably wrong. Bob may feel different, but and everybody thought it was, initially when we got it defined, it was just Vietnam vets that had post-traumatic stress. We were like, oh, we've got this disease or whatever. And now it's worldwide. We understand that trauma, near-death experiences have effects on the brain and the emotions, which are all embedded there. And the journey goes on. The beat goes on. I can't tell you how late to see Bob here and his humor, but I really miss Walter's humor because I just had so many blessed years with him, different than many of the folks, and I think this class changed a lot of lives. So I think my time may be up. I don't know if we got a few more. Huh?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shad. And I think I share all of our appreciation of you allowing us to hear the voice of Walter and to see him again. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so we have a bit of time for us to talk amongst ourselves, and I have a question that I would love to hear your answers to. Why was the course so powerful?
Who are you asking that question?
Both of you. Both of you.
You want to go first, Bob?
I mean, I don't know.
I just think,
I mean, what I do know is,
you hand me yours.
oh. All right, so what I know for certain is lots of people have tried to duplicate it and they can't. So there was something magical about it. And I think the less time you spend trying to figure out why it was successful, the happier you'll be.
Did Walter rub off on you? You've always been funny.
He says, I'm going to change the subject. He spent 16 years in politics. I learned how to answer a question other than the one that was asked, and I'm going to do it again now. So you said something, Shad, that I think is a lot of things that were very, very important, but said something that it never occurred to me that I should respond and say that you're wrong on this, because it was accepted wisdom that we lost the war. And it's a pejorative verb, and it's used a lot, and it's not the case. We decided to come home. We made a choice to end the war, and it was the right choice to make. It wasn't without consequences. Thank God we had Ted Kennedy and Gerald Ford, who made it possible for over 1 million Vietnamese to find refuge in the United States. So it's not like it was free of any consequences. We just decided we're coming home. We didn't negotiate it. We hadn't negotiated an agreement to get our prisoners of war out, but we basically said the war is over. It was a wise and good thing to do.
The old saying, "The truth will set you free." I don't think I'm overstating it. I think America had all these opinions, lost this, that, or whatever about the war, but we were definitely. People were really nervous approaching us, and we really didn't want to talk to civilians, particularly probably with all soldiers. I mean, my father, my uncles, they really never really wanted to talk about it because it's horrible. It's man's inhumanity to man when it comes down there, kill or be killed. But through Walter's class, we had to start with young 18, 19, 20-year-olds to tell them the truth about who we are as American soldiers, whether, in this case, the Vietnam War, and they heard the truth, nothing but the truth. And we had a voice through this class, and it continued for years. And hopefully that was a start of spreading it to the rest of the country, because they got a lot of coverage, and all of a sudden it was okay for us to talk about the people that have to be the spent rounds, the ones that have to go in, good, bad, or indifferent, to serve their country in a war, popular or unpopular, to talk about it. And it was interesting that, to me, and I've been all over the world, it started in this class. That's my opinion. And combat vets like Bob and Hubble and all of them came in, and we finally had a place to go. It's like people that go to therapy have a place to go, and, you know, we can talk about what we're struggling with. But everybody was struggling about what really happened, you know, whether it was politically, individually, or whatever. We had a chance, and it was like so therapeutic for everybody, including the soldier, for people to be able to talk and ask questions and talk about really what it was really like, and not what you see in movies or whatever. I used to say, oh, God, you guys, it was terrible. I said, you couldn't smell it. You didn't walk in it. You didn't feel the heat. You didn't feel the anxiety. You can walk out of a movie, you can eat your popcorn, drink your Coke, and walk out. Woo, glad I'm out of there. You can't do that in a war. That sort of stuff came out in this class. Tell it like it is. And some was brutal. There were times I forgot, you know, because I had street language then. I mean, I talked like, you know, it took me years to, I had to take acting before I went to Washington, so I didn't turn people off saying four-letter words, because that was my language. And I had to learn, you know, polite language to talk to the politicians or whatever. You're not going to curse them or whatever. Nothing's going to happen. But it's... I should have briefed you. I know it. Bob, you were too busy. But, you know, it's an honor to be sitting here. I just left Atlanta. I was with several Medal of Honor winners. I was inducted in the Veterans Hall of Fame with Colin Powell and some other people. But sitting with these people was just wonderful, and I'm sitting with one right now. I mean, a legendary Bob Kerrey. But the fact that we can sit here, because I was a street dog, and it was very difficult when Max Cleland and President Carter brought me in to push and sell the Vet Center program. You know, afro beard. I looked like, I was a street dog. I looked just like the guys on the streets, and I had to learn the language. I had to at least, you know, the messenger had to be listened to. I learned a lot. I cut my hair, shaved my beard, and as best I could, and try to put on a suit and not curse. But somehow I got through it. God is good.
I want to ask, I just want to push. I would hate to disagree with a distinguished senator and governor of the state where I was born. But can't we say more than it was just magical that this class had this power? I'd like to push that just a bit, because there's a real difference between what Bob said and what Shad said.
What's the difference?
Well,
Unlike you, I don't hate to disagree with you. So what's the difference between what Shad said and I said? Walter created this class, and it can't be done again. There's no Walter. There was a magical moment. He seized an opportunity and had guys like Shad leading it out. It was spectacular. And there's no need to feel terrible because we can't create it again. I can't create Woodstock again. I'd love to. You know, yeah, you might have been there, that first one. So I don't see it as an admission of failure or defeat. It's just sometimes you just can't recreate the magic. And there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it can be something wrong with it, because you can end up, you know, feeling terrible because you can't create something that was wonderful. That doesn't sound to me like a good thing to do.
I think that we have time now for some questions or comments from the audience members. And what I would like to suggest that there are two microphones at the stage. And if you would like to raise a question or a comment, please step forward. I see someone standing up. No?
Hello, Richard. I'm surprised you remembered me. Maybe this isn't appropriate, but I want to bring up something new. We were talking about losing the war, and I believed we lost the war. And we didn't lose military, we pulled out. And I went back to Vietnam after being away for 50 years. And I was there about a week, and I'm looking around and I'm going, these buildings are all brand new. They got Christian Dior and all these high-end stores there. And I'm asking you, isn't communism primarily an economic system? No. It's not? No. Okay.
Political system and an economic.
Well, yeah, but it is political.
Well,
but
if you're a citizen of a communist country, you sure as hell know the difference.
Yeah.
And the people of Vietnam know. I mean, I think we absolutely did the right thing withdrawing.
Oh yeah, no, but my point was, is you go to Vietnam now, and their economic system is capitalism.
Hold a demonstration against the policies of the
Yeah.
country. See how they greet you.
But the lineage of the government there is communist. It's not a totalitarian regime, as far as I can tell. I've been there 4 times. I was in Hanoi in September, and I tell people, veterans, if you want to go back and relive the war, the only thing you're going to relive is the heat and the humidity. Everything else is different. And right now, my observation is it's a lot happier place than the United States. It is a lot safer than the United States. You go to Vietnam, and it's all right to be from California. They don't help you. When I go to Vietnam, and they wave at me, and they say, where are you from? I don't say the United States anymore. I say, California! You don't do that in Oklahoma. But so I'm trying to say it's just like... we won the Cold War, and in Vietnam, maybe we lost initially, but I don't think we completely lost, because it's their economic system is primarily capitalism, and that's just from a high school graduate. I'm a casual observer there. And I'll tell you, since we go back to the class, let's say the main thing I learned about the class was I did 2 tours in Vietnam. Both of them were completely different. And the thing I learned here is they're not just one Vietnam story. Everyone was different. Everyone was different. And people came out of that war different. That's all I got to say. Who's next?
You said it very well.
I think that belongs in the front.
Okay. Your mic is hot?
Yes, it is. I think so.
Look, I mean, the only reason I mentioned the winning and losing of the war is that there's a revisionist effort going on right now that we didn't lose the war, that we didn't have to lose the war, that we surrendered. We didn't surrender. We made a conscious decision to withdraw, and it was the right decision. And it was, I think, an accurate analysis that if you really want to win the war, by the definition of the people who plan such things, the cost was too high. It was too high as it was. There's no need for us to feel shame, other than what we did while we were there, that we stopped fighting that war. It was a wise and a good thing to do.
Hi, Mr.
Okay, I think we have another question.
Hi, Mr. MESHAD and Senator Kerrey. My name is Tu Pham, and I'm a former student of this class. And I'm going to sort of be an annoying person and not ask a question, but make a comment. And like Senator Kerrey, I'm not going to try to sort of decode the magic of Walter's class.
It was her father I was talking about earlier.
But I think what was wonderful about the class was that it created moments that, as Senator Kerrey said, you can't capture. And I want to channel him for a moment, and one of the things I think he would stop.
Do you actually know what's inside here that you're going to?
No, not you.
No.
I'm going to
You're
channel, I'm
channel
sorry, I'm going
Walter.
to channel Walter
Walter,
for a
good.
moment. And what
Thank
I think
God.
he would do is the moment that I'm trying to capture is that it's for someone like me who was born in Vietnam to have an opportunity to thank veterans for really the bravery and the courage and the sacrifice that you all made so that I could stand here and acknowledge this on Veterans Day. So I just wanted to take a moment and ask any of the veterans who are here today to stand, please, as Walter would very much have asked people to do, so that we can acknowledge. And I'm gone.
Hi, I was also went to this class in 1985,
No, you didn't.
and I'm here with some of my friends that were also in that class with me. And yeah, you know, this is also more of a comment just to say that I think the power of this class for, you know, 17, 18, 19-year-olds, which is what we were way back then, in addition to just the exposure to this perspective that we might not have had just on our own, was that it really posed for us, you know, an opportunity to think about our moral code, our sense of purpose, who we were going to be in the world, how we were going to walk through it. And like, that's getting it all emotional. But that's what college is about, you know? This experience was like, impacted me my whole life. I mean, I'm turning 60 this year, and I think about this class all the time. I have a daughter who's 17. You know, I guess I was 19 when I took this class. Like, it's crazy to me, and it just has really, really stayed with me the whole time. And Walter gave me that gift, and all of you. You know, it was, so thank you, and yeah, thank you.
So, I was asked to speak last night. I too was in this class. I also was in Professor Kapp's class, The History of Religion, when he taught it with Steve Allen. And I think in terms of contextualizing it, or let me start with why the magic of the class. UC Santa Barbara, when I was there, the top two classes, it was not just the Vietnam vet class, it was the sociology of sex, also in Campbell Hall. And I am a mother of a sophomore UCSB student. I think, you know, it reminds me of like the class at Yale, the #1 class that's on happiness. Does UC Santa Barbara need a class on happiness? No. It is more what is relevant, what is, I think UCSB students push the boundaries, and that this class certainly did. And in my life, I actually was a political science major and managed to get a job as a foreign service officer with USAID. So I served my country around the world for more than 2 decades. And when I was in South Africa working on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the horrors there, lessons from this class. I applied, right? It was bring the voices to the table, have the hard conversations from very different perspectives, and honor all of those. I used those lessons in El Salvador as well. When I was working in Vietnam on a PEPFAR funded, which is HIV/AIDS funding, setting up the School for Social Work in Vietnam. Of course, I went back to the class, the Vietnam vet class, and what did I learn, what did I remember, what could I read about that would help me inform to better understand those people, you know, the Vietnamese and what we were trying to get through with the current government of Vietnam. So I think it's not just the magic of the class, but I can only imagine if you went to all of us, the lessons that you'd capture and how we applied all of those lessons, you know, not just locally in Santa Barbara or the state or the country, but worldwide. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much.
I think we have time for one more question.
I guess that's me. I wanted to say thank you, first of all, to both our speakers and to Professor. And it strikes me that one of the most basic things that I learned, not from the class, but from writing about the class. I was an outsider in that way, but I'm a professional journalist who is grateful for the fact that people talked honestly to each other and to the audience that would come. And that, I thought, was one of the greatest contributions, not just to me as a writer, but to the world who would listen, because it's sometimes talking truth to power. Other times, it's from the heart. And all these things kind of came together under initially Walter's aegis, and then others who took up the torch. And I wanted to thank you for doing that.
Sorry, Laura said I could go. So I have a little different perspective. I just realized, I don't know why I just realized, I was born in Omaha, Nebraska. And my dad was in the Air Force, and he was in Vietnam, and African-American man, so he was there in, I think, 65, 66. I looked it up last night that 25% of the men who died in Vietnam were black men, although they were, I don't know, maybe they were 10% of the population or less, and 12% in the war. And I remember after I was with Lisa in the class in '85, and I am 60 now. I call it sexty, just so you know. But my father never, ever talked about it, would never talk about it. And he had a wound from a bullet in his leg, and he wouldn't even talk about that. And one time, Walter said, you know, talk to your father. We had to write a paper, I think, and I was a math major, and I never wrote anything. And I took that sociology of sex class, too. I just remembered that. He was a little drunk. He finally talked to me about what it was like. He had only told me he did communications. He had top secret clearance, couldn't talk about it. And he talked about it that night, and he talked about what started the war. And he told me it was false. It wasn't real. They made it up. What started the war, not the Tet Offensive, but they were monitoring something in the ocean. I can't remember what it was called. The Gulf of Tonkin, yeah. Yeah, and I sat there, and that was a gift that Walter gave me, that I was always afraid to talk to my father about that, and it really changed our relationship after that. And I was just sitting here thinking about that, and how now it's come full circle. I'm an EPBU, an Episcopalian Buddhist, and my teacher is a Vietnamese monk, Thich Nhat Hanh. And it's like, how did this all come together? The universe does strange things. But I just wanted to thank Walter, thank family, and thank all of you for bringing and literally changing my life. And my perspective in my life has stayed not the same, but it's because of this class. So thank you.
Wow, thank you.
Before I thank our two speakers, I'd like to close our meeting today the way that we closed this course for 40 years. And that was Wilson. And Wilson would tell the class the following. And I'd like to read Wilson's words to the class every year for those 40 or so years. Wilson would say, you have three choices: lead, follow, or get out of the way. Because of who you are, where you are, and what you are, we expect that you will lead. Here is my point. You must lead. You're the best we've got. You must lead. Thank you very, very much, Shad and Bob, for joining us and leading us in this discussion and recollection of this extraordinary class that was really magical. Thank you very much.